Well, thank you everybody for coming. I'm really excited to give this talk about the new subtests of the WAIS-5. Just a little bit about me. I've worked for Pearson for about 13 years now, and I have worked on the WAIS for about 8 of those years. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about the new subtests. So let's talk a little bit about what I'm going to be talking about. So the first thing I'm going to do is give an introduction to the WAIS-5 and going to go over a little bit about its structure as well as the rationale for its update, as well as talking about the new subtests, which are the subtests of running digits, set relations, spatial addition, symbol span, and naming speed quantity. So a big question that we get sometimes is why update the WAIS? Well, the norms get out of date. People answer differently, and there's a little bit of a shift known as the Flynn effect, whereby people wind up doing a little bit better on previous versions of the test. And we also want to reflect changing demographics of the US, such as race, gender, region, etc. We also want to keep up with technology, cultural, and language changes. So sometimes examinees' responses will change as well. I'm not giving away too much by saying that I was happy to add the word frenemy into the manual. And we also need to give examiners guidance on how to score such responses. We also want to improve usability of the test and improve the psychometric properties. And finally, we also want to enhance clinical utility. Another reason why we want to update the WAIS is to keep up with some of the changing models of psychology. They tend to get revised in light of new psychological research, and our assessments should reflect this. So some of those areas of research would include neurodevelopmental and neurocognitive research, as well as structural models of intellect. And we also want to keep up with working memory models and research and developments there as well. So all told, we need to have new subtests to better measure new and evolving constructs, and we also need new ways to interpret results with respect to these. So what are some of the changes to the WAIS-5? Well, the retained subtests have updated item and scoring content, simplified administration instructions and reduced administration time. We have improved usability, so to reduce examiner fatigue, reduce examinee fatigue also. That can lead to increased rapport, as well as more appropriate scoring values in line with psychometric guidelines. We also have new ancillary scores that provide for richer interpretation. And we also have new subtests that help increase the construct coverage that I mentioned earlier. So for clients who are suspected of intellectual giftedness, one of the things that I'm really glad got added to the WAIS is a SIG start points, which will actually altogether decrease administration time by about 25%. So let's take a look at some of the retained subtests. So as you can see here, we have 15 retained subtests, but they're not exactly identical. So let's go to what you saw in the WAIS-4. So let's go over some of those changes right now. So as far as arithmetic, we found that it actually loaded better on the fluid reasoning index rather than the working memory index. And we also have some time bonus scoring for items 20 through 22. Those of you familiar with the WAIS-4 will be wondering, well, where did digit span go? It hasn't gone anywhere. We've just split it into 3 independent subtests, which are named digits forward, digit sequencing, and digits backward. We also have updated scoring on those 3 subtests, as well as letter number sequencing, where items 9 and 10 are each worth 2 points per trial instead of 1. Figure weights and letter number reasoning are now for all ages. It doesn't have that cap at age 69. Instead, it goes from 16 through age 90. And figure weights items 17 through 28 are worth 2 points. So make sure to add up the points on those items correctly. Now, as far as the subtests used to derive the FSIQ, these are what they are: similarities, vocabulary, block design, matrix reasoning, figure weights, digit sequencing, and coding. And you'll notice that I've added digits forward. And even though it doesn't contribute to the FSIQ, you should still administer it before digit sequencing because it was standardized. The WAIS was standardized this way. And here are the primary index scores. And the main change from the WAIS-4 that you'll notice is that instead of perceptual reasoning, we found that a 5-factor model fit better. And so we now have the indices of visual, spatial, and fluid reasoning. Now let's go on to an overview of the new subtests. So first of all, we have a new measure of working memory called running digits, which I will get to in a moment. We also have extended coverage in the working memory domain. So we've added the subtests of spatial addition and symbol span. In the fluid reasoning index, we have a new measure called set relations. And in the processing speed index, we have a new measure called naming speed quantity, the processing speed domain. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. What are these new subtests and what are they about? Well, for running digits, the examinee is read a sequence of digits and has to recall the specified number of recent digits in order. So for this subtest, the examinee can't use rehearsal, or at least not very well, and instead they have to passively attend and continually update the last digits of the sequence in their recent memory. So this is a better coverage of the working memory structure, and the main change, the main feature of this subtest is that it's a faster administration than the other digit subtests, in that you administer the digits at a rate of 2 digits per second. So getting into how you would do this. So for paper administration, we do say that you can consider downloading a metronome app. If you do use it, obviously silence it, kind of keep it out of examinee's point of view. And as you can see here, it's going relatively quickly. For Q Interactive, we will automatically have a silent metronome pre-installed on each item, but if you find that back and forth distracting, you can go ahead and tap it to keep it from distracting you. And you would administer it as follows. You would say, I'm going to say some numbers. When I stop, tell me the last 3 numbers in the order I say them. So for example, you would say 2, 9, 4, 8, 9, 5, 4, 9, 3. Goes by pretty quickly. And the correct response would be 493. So as far as how to score this, for using this same example, the correct response in this case would be 493. But I'm going to go over a few examples of how you would actually score different responses. So let's say the examinee recalls the digits 5493, which is one more than the number they were supposed to recall. Well, in this case, you are supposed to always score from the last digit backwards. So in this case, the 3 is correct. The 9 is correctly recalled, as is the 4. And even though they added this additional digit at the beginning of that string, all of the last digits that they were supposed to remember were correctly remembered in their proper location, so they're awarded 3 points. But suppose the examinee recalled the string, but then added a digit. Well, unfortunately, this mistake is going to prove costly because the 3 is not correctly recalled as the last digit, the 9 is not correctly recalled as the second to last digit, and the 4 is not correctly recalled as the third to last digit, so they are awarded 0 points. Now, partial credit is available for this subtest, and here's an example here where the examinee would be awarded partial credit. So in this case, the 3 is recalled correctly as the last digit, the 9 is not correctly recalled, but the 4 is correctly recalled as the third to last digit, so they would be awarded 2 points. Now, this does get a little complicated, so I have 3 simple keys as far as how to score this. The first is to practice with the key. The second is to definitely practice with the key. And the third is to absolutely practice with the key. Get yourself familiar and comfortable with this. And just for what it's worth, it is actually called a scoring template, but key is easier to remember as far as shorthand goes. Now, for those of you who are wondering how to score this on Q Interactive, it's actually pretty simple. You would simply enter in the digits that the examinee recalls into a keypad, and each one of these individual digits is automatically scored for you. Some reminders as far as the navigation rules of this subtest. Do remember to discontinue after 2 consecutive imperfect scores, as well as remembering to reverse after an imperfect score on item 3, which is a teaching item, or item 4, which is the second item administered, but it is not a teaching item. These navigation rules are automatic on Q Interactive, if you're wondering. All right, so moving on to the next new subtest, which is set relations. For this subtest, the examinee reviews relationships among concepts, which are depicted as circles, and select the response option that best depicts the relations between the concepts that the words describe. So whether or not the two concepts are completely separate, whether or not there's some overlap between the concepts, or whether or not one set or concept is a subset of another one. So for example, with this question, which one best shows how gray things and rocks go together? Perhaps no gray things are rocks and no rocks are gray things. Perhaps all rocks are gray things. Perhaps all gray things are rocks, or perhaps some gray things are rocks and some rocks are gray things. And some gray things are not rocks and some rocks are not gray things. And the answer is that last one. Now, as far as scoring on this subtest, the only thing to watch out for is that on the last 5 items, items 23 through 27, partial credit is available. So on the record form here, as an example, if the response is marked in both bold and color, they would be awarded full credit. If the response is bold only, they would get a partial credit response of 1 point. Do remember to discontinue after 3 consecutive imperfect scores, not scores of 0. And as usual, scoring and navigation are automatic on Q Interactive. The next subtest I'm going to be discussing is spatial addition. The examinee for this subtest is shown 2 grids in sequence. Each grid has blue and or red circles. After each pair of grids, the examinee uses a set of chips to create a new grid by combining the grids that they just saw based on a set of rules. So here's what the chips look like: red, white, and blue chips. And the examinee would be shown a grid like this, and you would tell them this is the first one, wait 5 seconds, show them the second one, wait 5 seconds, and then tell the examinee to put the circles in the grid. This subtest, by the way, is updated from the WAIS-4 in case this might look a little bit familiar to you. And this is what the correct response would look like. Now, the one caution I have for spatial addition is that this is the only subtest in which the start point is based on the age of the examinee. So for older examinees, ages 70 through 90, make sure you use the earlier start point. And again, navigation is automatic on Q Interactive. The next subtest is also from the WAIS-4, the Wechsler Memory Scale 4th edition. The examinee views one or more abstract symbols and then selects them in sequential order from a set of response options. And if the examinee recalls all of the correct symbols and only the correct symbols in the correct order, they are awarded 2 points, but they're awarded 1 point for all of the correct symbols and only the correct symbols in an incorrect order. So as an example here, you would show this stimulus to the examinee and say, look carefully at the symbols and remember the order you see them. And then you would follow that up after 5 seconds with the response page, telling the examinee to point to the symbols I just showed you in the order you saw them. And the correct response in this case is DB, and they would get 2 points for that. And they would get 1 point if they remembered the correct symbols, but in an incorrect order. Once again, remember to discontinue after 3 consecutive imperfect scores. And navigation of those with this discontinue rule is automatic on Q Interactive. And finally, the last subtest is naming speed quantity. Within a specified time limit of 75 seconds, the examinee has to name the number of squares, the quantity of squares inside a series of boxes as quickly as possible. So this is what a sample item would look like. And it may seem, okay, well, how long would this take? And it actually doesn't take very long. So to name this, it only takes me as long as it takes to say 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 1, 4. Okay. Now the actual test items are, they have 20 boxes that they need to identify the numbers in. And you would just tell them, name how many squares are in each box as fast as you can without making mistakes. So the tips that I have for this are to remember to record only errors. As you can tell from how quickly I read off those quantities, it's going to be way easier for you to just mark a slash through only the incorrect response on a record form rather than circling each one. Be prepared for very fast item completion times, even 5 seconds for a test item. And for naming the quantities of all 40 boxes across the 2 test items, scores of 19 are a total of 5 seconds across all 40. So somebody hire those examinees to be auctioneers. So just bearing that in mind, administration times for this subtest as a whole are often under 1 minute for many examinees. So just to wrap up, we do have updates to all of our WAIS-5 subtests, including item content and scoring, updates to the factor structure using a five-factor model. We have new norms, so that's always good to have. An update from what are now 16-year-old norms. We have 5 new subtests to cover a broader range of abilities. We have scoring and administration rules designed to make administration faster. And finally, we have more of the same automated scoring and navigation on Q Interactive. And I just wanted to call your attention to 2 more upcoming webinars about the WAIS. We have the ancillary indices that I mentioned earlier on May 29th, and we have a webinar on how to identify clinical subgroups within the WAIS-5 on June 5th. And with that, Erin, do we have any questions?
We do. Thank you so much, Cliff. That was great. Sure. We do have some questions that are coming in, and for those of you that are attending, if you want to put additional questions in the chat, we'll get through as many questions as we can today. The first question I have is, how were the gifted start points developed for WAIS-5?
Yeah, so for those suspected of intellectual gifted start points, SIG start points, we call them for short, what we did is we took the most difficult items that all 100% of the gifted examinees answered correctly. So it's pretty nice. I know that when it comes to figure weights, you're actually jumping almost half the subtest ahead. So it's definitely going to reduce administration time overall, and that's always good in case you're having somebody coming in for identification purposes for giftedness.
Great, thank you so much. We did have a question, if you can jump back to spatial addition.
Sure.
There was a question about how the examinee determines where to put the chips. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so as you're explaining, you're going to show them basically the first stimulus, whether it's page or you're going to hit the button on Q Interactive. You'll explain to them, say, I'm going to show you 2 chips, and you actually go through a process of demonstrating to them how to do it. So once they've seen how to do that, they're also given sample items. But basically, if you have a blue chip in the same spot on both cards, they're supposed to put a white chip there. And if a blue chip is, or a blue circle, I should say, is only in a spot on one of the 2 stimuli, then they're supposed to put a blue chip there instead. So 2 blue chips together in the same spot equals a white chip.
Wonderful. And the red chips are for?
Therefore, to be ignored. So it's basically a distraction for the examinee, and are they able to ignore that as they were told earlier?
Great, thank you so much. What is the range of FSIQ and index scores available with WAIS-5?
Sure. So the range for the FSIQ is 4 standard deviations below, so 40 scaled score, or a standard score of 40, and it goes up to 4 standard deviations above with a score of 160. And for the index scores, they all range from 45 to 155, which is 3 2/3 standard deviation below and above the mean, respectively.
Great. Another question that came in is there a brief form to administer FSIQ?
Yeah, so we do get this question a lot. So the GAI is the General Ability Index. That's a more abbreviated form. Sometimes it's used more in identification of gifted folks. And it has a very high correlation with the FSIQ. And that one, you only need 5 subtests. You don't administer the working memory subtest of digit sequencing, or you don't need to, I should say. And you also wouldn't administer the processing speed subtest of coding. So you would just need similarities, vocabulary, matrix reasoning, figure weights, I think, and one other one I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But just definitely a briefer form.
Wonderful. getting a lot of questions about spatial addition, so I'm going to go back to that
Sure,
one.
sure.
And I know you're working on Q Interactive as well, Cliff. So
Mhm.
can you talk about how that is administered on Q Interactive and if the chips would be required if you're doing a Q Interactive administration?
Yes, yeah, you will definitely still need the chips, just like you need the block design blocks for block design. So the examinee is still going to be, or actually, no, I think you drag actually the chips. So I take that back. It's been a little while. So for that one, the examinee is going to drag chips that they see on their screen in front of them to the appropriate locations on their grid. So they see basically what you do is you touch the show stimulus page on your on your iPad. You show them your grid, the first grid, show them the second grid that goes off of their client iPad, and then they would drag the chips from one of three stacks, or and just drag it up to the location that they want, and then that's it. Then you would score it, and Q Interactive, I believe, can score that automatically.
Wonderful. One more question on spatial addition is about the instructions. So can you talk a little bit about the instructions that are given to the examinee when
Sure.
doing spatial addition?
Sure. So I don't have them memorized, but basically you're telling them, I'm going to put a white chip wherever I see the blue circle in the same spot on both grids. And then I'm going to put a blue chip where I only saw a blue circle on one of the two grids before. And then when the red chips are introduced partway through the subtest, you say ignore, or when the red circles are introduced, you say ignore the red circles. And if the examinee asks, you tell them again, ignore the red circles.
Great.
Mhm.
Um, we did a couple questions come in about running digits
Mhm.
and people asking, about, making sure that they have the right pace. People are excited about the metronome on the digital app. Any other tips for people as they're trying to prepare to administer that subtest?
Yeah, just practice, definitely practice, 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 not just the scoring on it, but also just being prepared to say things a little bit faster than you might be used to. The issue, mainly comparing that with the digit span tasks or the letter number sequencing tasks, is that you're saying them a lot faster. So be prepared, maybe even, just you say it maybe in your mind mentally before you actually have to give it, but it's a lot easier than, or it's a little bit harder than 1 per second, where you're just kind of looking, and if you have a metronome, just kind of glancing. It's a lot harder to say two things per second than one. So just get used to that different pace. And that's about kind of the main thing. It goes by relatively quickly. The main thing to just pay attention to is make sure not to miss a reversal. For whatever reason, with that item 4, because it's not marked as a teaching item, it's easier to skip that one, and forget that, oh yeah, this is one of the first two items administered. So if they do get an imperfect score on that, be sure to reverse one at a time. But those are the main tips: is just practice, not only with the key, obviously it was a little bit of a joke, but also just get used to it. But it'll go by relatively quickly. And once you get the scoring down, then the administration time is not that long.
Great. We have had some questions about the use of Q Interactive with older adults, and I thought this would be a great one for us to chat about a little bit, again, because I know you've been involved in Q Interactive. Any tips for using it, or what did you see when we were field testing this product with older adults? How did that go, and any tips you'd have for using Q Interactive with older adults?
Sure. So it would. I haven't done as much field testing, but what I can say is that when we were trying, for example, set relations, we tried a few things, and we've wound up realizing that some of the things that we wanted to do, obviously, I showed the circles moving on my PowerPoint animation. We were thinking about maybe trying that, but for whatever reason, just across the age ranges, it didn't quite wind up working as well as we had hoped. So we just changed formats to a multiple choice format on that. And but when it comes to older adults, I mean, if there's a clear lack of comfort, if there's a clear discomfort with that, it might be better to use paper and pencil. But I think more and more people are getting used to smartphones, smart tablets, stuff like that. So it's going to depend. But I wish I could say I was like an expert in gerontology or just the use of technology among different age ranges. But it's relatively easy to use, and we've seen different populations take up the technology. So it's gaining popularity, I think.
Great.
Mhm.
And we will have the option for people to use paper administration if that does appeal to some customers. If you feel like, based on your clinical judgment that that would be the right fit, we'll still have paper administration as an option. So, and in cases where there is motor impairment, we're going to talk more about that, I think, next week in our webinar next week, but we'll be talking about some of that if there are motor difficulties. I said I wasn't going to ask another one about spatial addition, but we did
Sure.
have another question about color blindness and if there was any concerns with color blindness related to the use of the chip.
So we do test our colors to make sure that that's not a problem. So I think there will be more specific information in the manual about it, but yeah.
Yeah. We did have some questions about if we had considered creating videos for some of these new subtests that show how they're administered. And I know you and I have already chatted about that. So I thought maybe you could share a little bit about that with our
Yes.
attendees here.
Yes, stay tuned. It's going to be a lot even clearer than this one because this one is probably needs a little bit of extra work on that because we'll actually show what the scoring template looks like, not just and show how you would align it. But what's going to happen with, for example, running digits is you're going to take the scoring template and it'll have like a nice little cutout area and you'll just align that last digit and it'll be very easy to see. You don't need to like memorize, which of these numbers and digits were when or anything like that. You'll lay it right on top of that and you'll be able to see, okay, this is last one, this is right, this is not right, this is right, this is not right. So whether you keep track of that with a check mark tick or an X if it's wrong, or however you choose to do that, it'll be easy to see. And then right on the fly, you'll be able to say, okay, that's 3 correct out of 4, or whatever the case may be. But yes, we're definitely going to be working on videos that'll help you with administering all of the subtests.
Great. I know we got a question about the descriptors and want to make sure that everybody that has questions about that is aware that they are different than WAIS-4. They're going to be very similar to what you have seen in WAIS-5 or in WISC-5, sorry. The difference from WISC-5 is that we use above average and below average rather than high average and low average. So in terms of the descriptors, wanted to add that clarification for everyone because that question came in on the chat as well. It looks like we have time for just one more question. Cliff, can you speak a little bit to the time savings, either between this version and the WAIS-4 or Q Interactive? We've had a couple of questions about the time savings of administration. So whichever one you want to pick to answer in our last minute here.
Sure. So I believe that for 50% of examinees, they're finishing all 20 of the subtests under 2 hours. And we have it broken down by what percentage of people finished within this time. So 95% finished by this time and 75% by this time. But it is definitely faster. And especially if you have somebody who you do suspect of being gifted, again, it's pretty nice to have 25% off that time because they do tend to discontinue late, if at all. And a lot of those early items really weren't necessary for them. But yeah, there's been a substantial decrease in administration time, and I think that's music to all of our ears.
Great. We did have one other question that I'll answer just real quick. There was a question about digital assets on Q Global. We will have digital assets available for users using Q Global. So stay tuned for more information on that as well. Thank you so much, Cliff, for spending the time and sharing this information. Thank you to all of our attendees for attending today and having this discussion with us about the WAIS-5. We have another session next week where I'm really excited for Selena to share with us about the ancillary scales, which she often refers to as the difference makers. We're so excited about the information that that's going to provide. Thank you all for attending today. We're so happy to be able to share this exciting information with you about WAIS-5. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.